Hello, today I'm going to show you how to paint a bumblebee, and I've made a proprietary sketch. The only way I find that a bumblebee stays still is if it's actually standing on a petal. I've just added a few things that are green to make a little map, and I'm now going round finding the shape of the petals just with a thin wash to claim the space, and I'm starting in a clockwise direction just so that I don't get lost. The lovely wavy edge of the petal, all the brush strokes going in the same direction now I've done the edge. I can put some shadows on in a little while, but the main thing is to claim the space and put the petal in. And then underneath it's much darker, so I'm just going to put the brush back in the paint again, and there's just a lot of shadow there, so it's this stronger paint but still the same colour. I'm not ready to add any different colours yet. And it's all twisted and curled at the bottom, which I can put in with the next coat of paint. It's the same paint but much stronger. That shows where the petals are overlapping, and again the other side of the stalk. It's just revealing almost a hole in the petals where you're looking at the next layer down. So continuing with the lighter colour, I'm now going to do the edge at the top all the way up to the next petal, and it gets darker at the bottom. So I'm just going to make the paint a little bit stronger, no water, just stronger paint, and then push them back into each other. I've now got a darker area because it's looking at the next layer down again. So I'm going around very gently looking for spaces where there's a gap in the petals, and so you're just looking through to the next layer. And I've also got some of the petals folded back, so you just have to keep looking and finding highlights that you can add to. These have got quite a lot of lines where they're unfurling, so I'm just going to put some lines in while I've got the same paint on the go. It's almost white in certain places, it's so thin, and lots of curly edges, so we've got a double curly edge here. I'll put the middle one in first with very weak paint. This is the one that's almost transparent, going down to the bumblebee, and a little bit of stronger paint near the edge where it's in shadow. So I'm dropping stronger paint into the edge, and then it just find its way down. And then I've got little bits peeking out all over the place, and the double layer here, so I think I can just slip that in. I might leave just a tiny gap so they don't merge, and there is a physical gap in places, not just completely joined. And then petals folded over here. I've got one stamen that's red, so I'm just going to put that in so that I don't lose it. We're going to add some cobalt violet because the edge is quite a different colour, possibly because it's butted up against a green leaf. If you've got one colour next to another, it can change it considerably. I'm nearly ready to put the bee in, but I'm going to put the leaf in first to make sure that the tones are compatible. All tones that are close and colours that are close to each other affect each other. So if I put it in, then I can make sure that the bumblebee shows well. I'm doing the head of the bumblebee with Indian yellow. If you haven't got Indian yellow, you could use yellow ochre and just add a little bit of orange to it. I'm going to put the area around the bumblebee in as well. It's a big petal here. I'm just going to take a little bit of the edge off because it's got quite a lot of fold, so if I make it lighter, I've got a chance to put the slightly darker folds in. Now the bumblebee shows up quite nicely there, and to help with the tones I'm going to go and put a detail on the petal above it, which has got a dark line and then lots of lines coming out. So I'm just going to put that in. It's just unfolding, so it's still a little bit creased. Now in my original study I did the wings in Azilian Crimson with just a change in tone. They're almost transparent in the middle. So with my original sketch as a reference, I'm going to start with something obvious. It's a dark area. It's always good to have a dark, and sort of maps it out. and then coming back to a leg, which is actually standing on a stamen, which is quite interesting to observe, and then round the back, and then forward, a bit more detail, and then another one, and there's some crossover here of bits. Now for the head, I'm going to use Indian yellow. So if you haven't got Indian yellow, you can look in the list of paints used in the description. There's mixing hints for how to mix things if you haven't got them. Now this isn't a flat area, so what I'm going to do is just get the brush again and just put a tiny bit stronger colour down there, and then a few little brush strokes just going up, and then moving to the wings, I'm going to use Azilian Crimson again, and they've got a dark line, so I'll start with the one that's on top, and then come out to the other side, and just use water to move the paint, because it is almost transparent in the middle. And then going to the far one, it's a different shape, the way it's resting, so it goes up and then round, and then slightly shorter with that side. Underneath I'm using Naples yellow, but you could use weak yellow ochre. I'm just putting in some very light areas, just watering the paint down a little. You've got to get the whole curve of the insect. Then I'm changing to yellow ochre, a slightly different colour to the Naples yellow. I'm just putting in the hairy bits. So I'm just going to cover the white paper, covering it all over because the dark's going to go on top of it. This wing isn't smaller, it's just that it goes over the dark area. Just try and make a line to suggest it. That's all dried now, and I'm going to put some stripes on. There's one just under the back of the wing, and it disappears almost to this side. And then there's a part of another one just showing there. And that's almost lost this side. I'll go back with the yellow ochre, which is more dominant towards the top. Just pop it in. And it goes to more Naples yellow at the back. And there's a lot of Naples yellow around the head area as well. We'll just make that a little bit more dominant. The wings have got a dark edge, so I'm going to use more Azilian Crimson and a little bit of the dark colour that I've just done the stripes with. Not a dominant suggestion, but a little suggestion. And then some indication of the area of the wings just coming like that where they expand. So just mixing up some more rose madder very weakly. And there's lots of nooks and crannies here that change in colour. So going in with the number 4 brush again, round the bottom petal, which changes colour quite a lot because it's in the shadow of the one on top of it. So I'll show you how to do that. So just put the basic rose madder in. And I'm changing to a number 1 brush, and I've got almost purple line with a shadow between the petals. I'm just going to drop that in. And again, a very dark line between the two petals, which is a little bit of shadow again, but it's not, it is sort of a shadow in the same colour. It's not grey or anything. And then where the petals are unfurling and slightly marked, there's even more. So I'm just putting lines into the wet paint just to give a suggestion, and then moving round the corner there's lots more lines, which all gives the roundness of the flower. But on top they're quite light, so I'm just going to dilute the paint a little bit, and I'm still using the small brush. I'm just going to gently put some colour in, and the petal is folded over. So go back to the bigger brush now, just fill in the edges. I use a small brush because I wanted to make it as light as possible. I'll just drop some lines in at the front, just a tiny bit more paint. And then it's very, very dark where the petal is folded over. And there's 2 or 3 petals all over each other here. So I'm just going to get a little bit of water on the brush, just smooth it out a fraction. And then here is very, very light again on the edge, almost clear. And in the middle is very, very dark, just where it's in shadow from 2 or 3 nearby petals. So I'll drop the very dark in, and I'm going to continue like that for the rest of the flower. It's more light, but it gets dark again where it's overlapped by other petals. So I'll put that in, and then get much stronger paint on the brush and go from the other end of the petal, from the middle. Just pull it out, let it find its own way. It's actually darker on this side. Clean the brush off, dab it so it's not wet or too wet, and just pull the paint back out again. So it's given quite a 3-dimensional effect there. Working my way round to the bottom, and I've added a little bit of French ultramarine to the rose madder just to give different colour to the bottom petals that are in a lot of shade. I'm just using a wet brush just to push it back a little bit. And then I've got more green showing, so I'm using the sap green and a little bit of lemon yellow and chrome yellow just to get the colour, and just popping in a leaf that goes round the corner. All these colours help highlight each other. If you miss out the leaves, then you're not giving as much emphasis on the pink, because the colours do actually help each other. I'm going to get the flat brush in a moment and just go back and leave room for the stalk of the stamen. Flat brush, just put a little line in. Now it's got very dark on the right hand side, so I'm just going to mix a little bit of indigo with the existing green and just add it in from the right. It's obviously curved and in deep shadow, and then just get the brush and just lick it across. Clean the brush off completely, go back to some lighter green, and then just merge them together. I will be putting highlights on this shortly. All the leaves are different aspects and shapes when they're curled around each other. And then I've got a stalk coming out. Now add the same dark on the other side of the leaf, where it again is causing a lot of shadow. We've just got a highlight of leaf. It doesn't come all the way forward, just partly forward. And then it goes back to the traditional green colour. I'll leave a gap for the stalk this time. And coming forward, it's lighter on top and petals overlapping the leaf. More green. It's amazing how the leaf is yellow in the middle and dark green on the edges with the bend of it. And it's dark green at the bottom again. I've just worked my way round a little bit further and put a few veins on the leaf, which I've done with yellow, and then it sends the green back. And here I've put shadow in against the stalk, which I couldn't do earlier because it was wet. I'm now going to move along here where it's actually conical, very, very dark colour. So I'm going to mix rose madder and French ultramarine and a little bit of Brazilian crimson together, just to make a very dark line for the area that the petal twists. It actually goes all the way down to there and out to almost the edge of the petal, and just pull the paint away. And I've got a chance to put another colour next to it. So I'm taking the paint all the way back because I don't want a line. And there's also a very dark line that goes down the side of it. So I'm just going to bleed that off as well so that it's not dominant. It's a crease. So now I go back with the original rose madder, start from the corner, put the rest of the petal in. Just bringing it forward from the point. It's quite light on the top side. And then there's some slightly darker lines where it's curved. All the creases still coming out. Clean the brush off again, take some of the excess moisture off it and just bring the paint up to the original line that I did. But you can see it does make it look as though it's bellowing out. Flowers now are a mid colour, and just pop them in. They're a little bit of shade. And I've got some more stamen there, which I can go around in a minute and just highlight, and a tiny bit more shade around there. And then there's another petal that comes out. I'm just going to put a base layer in, and then there's lots of nooks and crannies. So I now come back to the first area up here, which disappears behind a petal and comes back again. So just pop it on, and then I've got another leaf again, so I'll leave that for a moment because it might bleed into the pink, and come up to the top, which I've got 4 layers. So I'll stick in the nearest one first, and I've got an overlap which I can put in. I've just put the top petal in, and I'll just say I've got the 4 layers here, so I've got to be a little bit thoughtful with the colours. So I'm going to put a dark one in because it's behind others, and then there's a lighter one that goes over it, and lots of curly bits. So I'm going to make a very weak colour and just go round a little bit and identify the obvious things first. And this is almost like somebody's holding it together with their fingers. It's very, very narrow here. So I'll just put the shape in and then come back and do the highlights. And again, there's a bit that's almost touching here. It's obviously just at the point of unfurling. And it comes all the way down. And then there's another one going round it. So we just stick the outer bit in for now. And there's another bit here that's semi-trapped. So what I've got to do is just work out where all the nooks and crannies are. So just block it in for now, and then when it's dry, I'll highlight the different areas. It's always best to go in slowly with these things. While I'm waiting for that, I can do the areas in the middle that are bent over that I left earlier because I was waiting for them to dry to get a clean edge. Some of them are almost white, they're so thin. But obviously I need some colour there. So going back with the same colour again and just go over. There's some of it's darker than others, so I'll just bring the colour down and bring the next petal round. Change the colour again. That's got lots of nooks and crannies, and some of them have got little red spots on, which I'll go back and put in on the next circuit. So I'm just using the rose madder, nothing else. And I'm going to go back to the area above the bee. And there's a very dark line that goes all the way down just till it meets its fluffy head. I now want to bleed those out slightly, so I'm going to put a weaker colour on and just put a second coat. I don't want to lose the harmony of it, because at the moment the bee's showing quite nicely, but just needs a little bit of darker work. And again, this one here is going round in two areas. So I'll put the nooks and crannies in. And then there's lots of areas where the bee is standing on stamen. So I'm going to get a rigger which has got longer hairs than a normal brush. If you haven't got a rigger, just use a number 1 and just go slowly. And it's actually standing on one, so I'm going to go make sure it's by its feet first. It doesn't really matter which way you paint these, as long as you're happy with what you're doing. And there's 4 more next to it, so I'll put those in. And some of them are lost. And that's got a lovely redhead that I can put in a moment. And then some of them have got spots, which I'm going to do in Azilium Crimson. And there's one here that's got a lot of spots. And then working my way back, I've got a very dark area here that needs a second coat. You can't do all this in one coat. And some darker lines over this side. And then further round, there's quite a lot of dark lines because the petal is sort of folding in on itself. So I'm going to put the top in and then go around, and they're not quite at the top because the top's much lighter. And then very much darker above the bee. I put that in and take it forward. Now I'm going to get clean water on the brush, not too wet, and just pull it down, pull it up, a little bit more paint, Just join it together. All the petals are quite individual when you look quite closely, and then go back over the top line that was much lighter. And again, the petal is bent over, so it's dark on the back. And then the ones behind it are slightly more violet, so I'm going to use cobalt violet. If you haven't got cobalt violet, just mix some French ultramarine with the pink and just pop those in. Just breaks up the petal nicely. And again over here, so it's giving it more definition. Now where it's going up from the bee, I'm just going to put a few more lines in. Now it's dried off a fraction, just to give it a little bit more harmony. I'm just putting in another leaf while waiting for other areas to dry, and by putting in the dark leaves or the bright leaves, they do vary enormously here, it brings the flower forward. They act as a foil for it. Now, I seem to have got a bit of a odd selection of blotchy leaves, but it was the bumblebee that attracted me. So I'm just putting in a mixture of French ultramarine, sap green and chrome yellow, and then to show the markings on the leaf, I'm going to add a little bit of yellow, and it just send everything back and do the markings on the leaf for me. So I've got the paint on, so now I'm going to go in with lemon yellow. Whatever yellow you've got will do the job. And there's a light area on the edge of this leaf, so I'll pop that in. And then the stem in the middle. And then the marks that come out. A little bit light on the edge as well. And then again, the lines coming out. And it makes this petal really stand out now. And there's a few more that I can do that are slightly darker. I'm just going around highlighting a few areas that need a little bit more separation where the petals overlap. Just looking for easy bits to do. So I've got quite a shadow down here. This time I'm going in with Winsor & Newton's Permanent Rose. Just hopefully it's slightly different colour, and I'm just rubbing it back with my finger, just giving a slight edge. And again, where there's anything that's slightly darker, just popping some in, letting the water do the work. It just separates one petal from another where there's natural shading. There's quite a lot of nooks and crannies. So just put the paint on, clean the brush and dry it slightly so you don't flood the paper. Just bring it back to a lost edge, and it makes the one petal stand out from another. It's also very good if there's a little bit of folding of a petal. So up here there's a little bit of folding. So just put some paint on, then get the water again. Use the brush to show the slight lines of the petals. And then down here there's quite a dark area where it's in shadow. So I'm going to go back in with more paint. And just again find a lost edge. And it brings one petal forward and sends another one back. Two more petals that can be defined with the way that they are just going round each other. I'm going as gently as I can. And then the one behind's a bit darker, so instead of using Rose Madder, I'm going to use a Permanent Rose, just in the hope that it's slightly different. It's very difficult to tell sometimes. Different companies call the paint slightly different names. And this petal is folded over and it's only dark halfway. Now there's some other areas that have got definite highlights, so what I'm going to do is use a flat brush. It's just a nylon flat brush. Dip it in clean water, dry it slightly, and then just take the paint back off lightly. and that'll help the painting look slightly more three-dimensional and the petal look curved. There's another area up here that's quite light, and if I put the paintbrush on some tissue in a moment, you'll see how much paint has come off. So it's quite pink. So I'm just going to work my way around that, doing that in a couple more places. But you need to do it with a fairly dry brush. There's only some of the petals that are catching so much light that you need to put a little bit of a highlight on. And this one's got some white lines going up, so I'll just take the paint, same method, but at a slightly different angle, into the pink. Thank you for watching my video. I hope you've enjoyed it and you'll try painting a bumblebee soon.